Today I am dealing with another interesting part of the hindbrain, that is cerebellum. I restrict my discussion to the parts, connections, and functions of cerebellum. And in the next class, I would continue with the circuitry and the various manifestations of the cerebellum in the next class. Here is the brain and the brainstem, and you have the cerebellum here as a part of the hindbrain. If you are going back with that plan of the voluntary movement, where the cerebellum fits in. Look here, cerebellum fits in at two levels. One here in the planning level. This is planning level. And this happens in the cerebral cortex, that is a cortical association area, and its communication to the premotor area. And unlike basal ganglia is restricted to this area only. But the cerebellum, only one part of the cerebellum is involved in this planning, the lateral part of lateral cerebellum. Then this one is another component of the cerebellum where it involves the spinal cord and the brainstem, and including the vestibular system. The spinal cord, brainstem, and the vestibular system for the axial and the distal muscle movements or contractions. This is the second part where the cerebellum participates. So in terms of the voluntary movement, cerebellum have a greater involvement in regulating our movements. Whereas basal ganglia is only involved in the planning and programming and certain other cognitive components. Though both are important, but if you are looking at the area of involvement of the cerebellum, you have the lateral cerebellum here, you have the spinocerebellum and vestibular cerebellum here. Okay, so this is where the cerebellum stands in the voluntary movement. Rhombencephalon is consisting of the metencephalon. The metencephalon is a pons and cerebellum. And the myelencephalon is the medulla oblongata. So now we are looking at this particular cerebellum. You can just see that the cerebellum is connected to the pons and the medullary component through the there are connections here. The superior, middle, and inferior peduncles. So they are the connectors which allows the fibers either to enter the cerebellum or to leave the cerebellum. That is about the cerebellar peduncle. Now come back here. This is the true picture showing the cerebellum here. You can just see that this is the cerebellum, this entire thing, and this is the fourth ventricle. This is the fourth ventricle, and this is pons here. This is medulla oblongata. This is one connector. This cerebellar peduncle, and the inferior and the middle is already beyond this. The remaining part is the cerebrum and the cerebral connection. Now, if I am taking this particular picture, so now look here on the, if I look posteriorly to this, because it's a sagittal section, and in this sagittal section, you see the cerebellum is like that. It is having a multiple folia. Here you have the gyri and sulcuses in case of a cerebral cortex. Here it is the multiple folia, and the total area of the representation is much more, or though it is only 1/10 or 1/10 of the part of the cerebrum, but it has the same almost equivalent area or more area than the cerebrum. So that means there is a representation of everything. So in this folia, they will be having many more foldings, or see that you have the sulcuses coming up here. So this forms the cerebellum with many folia. Now this is what the cerebellum looks like in the posterior from the posterior side. It's a view taken from the Gray's anatomy. This is the cerebellar view, and it's something amazing. This is the central part. This is two cerebellar hemispheres, and this is the sulcus, the primary sulcus or primary fissure. It's called a fissure here. It's not sulcus, a primary fissure here, and these are the, the posterior or lateral fissures on this side. Now, going back here, say again, coming back to this main diagram, wherein this is the cerebellum. Now, this cerebellum is divided. This is the primary fissure. This is the primary fissure. And you can just see that the same type. This is primary fissure. And this yellow part is the anterior cerebellum. This is anterior cerebellum. I have just marked as a anterior. This greenish part, you just see that a large amount of this is a posterior cerebellum. This is a posterior cerebellum. You have a multiple folia in each of them, and this part is the posterior. It is a posterolateral fissure here, and it separates the floccular. This is a flocculonodular lobe. This is a flocculonodular lobe. So the color combinations are given here on this side. So this is the anterior part of cerebellum, and this is connected to the spinal cord. This posterior part of the cerebellum is connected to the cerebrum, especially the premotor area or association areas. And this is a flocculonodular lobe. This is connected to the vestibular system. Now, coming back, we have this is the part of the cerebellum when if you are looking at this one, it is opened up, and when it is opened up, or if I say that this one I spread it, I just open it and keep it. When I open it and keep it, so this part, if I dissect out and open and keep it, and you get the cerebellum something like a leaf-like structure. You have the number of structures, and you see that the central part is vermis. Central part is called vermis, and you have the separated by the many folia or the fissures. This is the primary fissure. Primary fissure makes this white part is the central anterior lobe of the cerebellum, and this yellowish part is the posterior lobe of the cerebellum, and this deep yellow is the flocculonodular lobe. And this part is divided into, in the sense, the anatomically, if you are looking at, it is divided into number of areas like vermis, lingula, central lobe, culmen, declive, folium, tuber, pyramis, uvula, nodulus, floccular lobe. So many things. All these descriptions really make difficult for us to understand. Okay, the names are fine. They have a definitive functionality of each of the name. Overall, if we are looking at the cerebellum, we can divide the cerebellum in 3 different parts. Same thing I have just made. This is the primary fissure. This is the primary fissure. This is the anterior part of the cerebellum, and this is the posterior part of the cerebellum, and you have the flocculonodular lobe. And in this, the central part, this area between the vermis and this area is an intermediate part of the cerebellum, or intermediate zone of the cerebellum. This is intermediate zone. This is the central vermis and intermediate zone, and these two put together is known as the spinal cerebellum. This is a spinal cerebellum. And this lateral part of the cerebellum, this lateral part of the cerebellar hemisphere, so from here and the lateral side, this is the cerebrocerebellum, because this is connected with the cerebrum. This is connected with the spinal cord. And this part, the flocculonodular lobe, this is connected to the vestibular system. This is a vestibular cerebellum. So now I can functionally divide the cerebellum. I think for us as a physiologist, we believe that the cerebellum is divided into three major functional areas. The one functional area which is very old, this is archicerebellum, that is flocculonodular lobe connected with the vestibular system, or vestibular cerebellum, that is the archicerebellum. So then this is a paleocerebellum, and this is a the lateral cerebellum is a neocerebellum. Okay, rather than playing with the words, let us be clear that the flocculonodular lobe is a vestibular cerebellum. Whatever the vestibular system performs the function, it performs. And this central and intermediate part on either side, this is the spinocerebellum connected to the spinal cord, and assist or it will direct the spinal cord for the motor actions. And this is the lateral part is the cerebrocerebellum. The cerebrocerebellum connects with the premotor cortex and motor association areas for programming and planning of the voluntary actions. So I repeat, the cerebrocerebellum, that is a lateral cerebellum. The intermediate cerebellum is a spinocerebellum and a flocculonodular lobe. These are the functional parts of the cerebellum. The topographical representation of the cerebellum. Here I have shown it earlier when I am describing about the proprioception. Now again, I'm bringing back the topographical organization. So you can just see that the topographically, the cerebellum is represented two times. You can just see that it is represented two times. The central part, this is the vermis. This is the worm-like structure. This vermis. The central part involve all the axial muscles. These axial muscles are two times represented. You can just see that this is one part of the axial muscles and another part of the axial muscles. And the distal muscles here, because up to this point is the spinal cerebellum. The distal muscles are on either side. So that means for the coordination and very smooth functioning of the voluntary action, these representations are essential. The remaining part is this lateral part is it is connected to the cerebral cortex. That is the representation, topographical representation of the cerebellum. So here, each one of them, they are projected, they are represented, but they are represented two times. And again, if you are looking at here, the left side and right side. Another interesting thing about the cerebellum, they try to control the same side of the body. So that means the cerebellar hemispheres of the right cerebellar hemispheres controls the right-sided musculature, the left one left-sided musculature. If you are considering the basal ganglia, it is the opposite or contralateral side. The right limbs receive inputs from the left basal ganglia and vice versa. So that means there's another feature of the cerebellum. Now move on. So now this cerebellum, if you are looking at, so this has the deep, because whatever the output the cerebellum gives, it is from the deep cerebellar nucleus. The cerebellar nuclei which is present in the lateral part of the cerebellum, this is known as a dentate nucleus. This is a dentate nucleus. One in the intermediate, this is the intermediate part of the cerebellum, that is the spinocerebellum. In the spinocerebellum, this has the nucleus interpositus. the nucleus interpositus here. There are, so these nucleus interpositus composite of the globosa and emboliformis. But they are merged together and they form the interpositus, the nucleus interpositus. Then the center one, vermis, has the nucleus, the name is a vestigial nucleus. Now, I again say there are one vestigial nucleus for the vermis, then interpositus nucleus from the intermediate part of the cerebellum, and dentate nucleus for the lateral part of the cerebellum. However, there is no, you just see that this flocculonodular lobe uses a vestibular nuclei of the medulla as its nuclei. So that means they are connected to the vestibular nuclei. Okay. Having said that, then that means vestibular nuclei also becomes a part of the cerebellar system, because some part of the cerebellar output it will utilize the vestibular nuclei. Now, if you are looking at this particular diagram, so this is a spinocerebellum, this is a cerebrocerebellum, this is the vestibulocerebellum. Now, this is connected to the vestibular nuclei, and that would be for the balance, posture, and eyeball movement. If there is something wrong, so then posture is, he will not be able to maintain the posture, he will not be able to maintain the balance, and he will have a nystagmus. Nystagmus is a involuntary jerky movement of the eyeball. So that is nystagmus, the eyeball movement. And if you are coming here, we have the lateral system and a descending system, medial system. These are for axial muscles. These are for distal muscles. So they are for motor execution and servo control mechanism, this particular portion. Now here, the dentate nucleus, this is a dentate nucleus. Dentate nucleus is connected with the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex. So this would be for the planning, programming, sequencing, and the cognitive components of the cerebellum. So this is broadly about various cerebellar nuclei and their functions. I repeat, dentate nucleus connected to the cerebrocerebellum, and it is for the motor planning, and the interpositus is connected with the spinal cord, and it is for the motor execution and especially the distal muscles. Then vestigial nucleus, that is in the vermis, that is connected to the axial muscles, that is for maintaining posture. Then vestibular cerebellum is connected to the vestibular nuclei for balancing and for eyeball movement. Cerebellum is connected with the rest of the nervous system through three peduncles. That means there are three peduncles: the superior peduncle, the middle peduncle, and the inferior peduncle. Now, if you are looking at the superior peduncle, this is connected with the ventral spinocerebellar tract. The ventral spinocerebellar tract ascends up here and reaches the it will go to the cerebellum through the superior cerebellar peduncles. So then middle peduncle, it is connected with the pontocerebellar tract. So that means from the pons, especially the pons receives input from the cerebropontine tract. Cerebrum may not directly talk to the cerebellum. Cerebrum sends information, the corticopontine fibers, they reach here, and from the pontine fibers, they will go to the cerebellum. That means corticopontine and pontocerebellar connections. That is here in the middle peduncle. This is corticopontine. Then inferior cerebellar peduncle, inferior cerebellar peduncle is connected with the dorsal spinocerebellar tract. This is the dorsal spinocerebellar tract coming here and distributing. Then it is also connected with the olivocerebellar tract. This is the olivocerebellar tract from the olivary nucleus in the medulla to the cerebellum, various parts of the cerebellum. Then it's also connected with the vestibular cerebellum. So vestibulocerebellum. Broadly, so the superior peduncle is the ventral spinocerebellar cerebellar tract, and the middle peduncle is a pontocerebellar tract. Inferior peduncle is a dorsal spinocerebellar and olivospinal cerebellar cerebellar tract or vestibulocerebellar tract. These are the major inputs to the cerebellum. Now, what are the outputs from the cerebellum? So now you can just see that output from the cerebellum, you can have only the superior peduncle and the inferior peduncle. So the middle peduncle, I have kept it blank. Now the superior peduncle output that would go to thalamus, either directly from the cerebellar nuclei to the thalamus, what is known as a dentatothalamic, dentate nucleus to thalamus, or that further relates into different areas. Then or dentatothalamo-cortical, that is for the planning of the action. Dentatothalamo-cortical fibers, cerebello-thalamocortical tract. So then it will give to pons here. This is pons. This is the cerebellopontine connections through this superior peduncle. And this is a reticular system. It gives to the reticular system in the entire brainstem area from mid this thing. In addition, it will give connections or efferent connections to the red nucleus. This is red nucleus, and that is the cerebello-pontorubral or cerebello-rubral connections. This is to red nucleus. So from the middle peduncle, there are no separate outputs. They are not outputs are not going through the middle peduncle. So then the inferior peduncle, it gives output to three areas. One to the medullary reticular system or pontine reticular system, and then vestibular nuclei, and that is the output from the cerebellum. So that means output is going to the parts either in the brainstem, midbrain, thalamic, and cerebrum. That is one thing. Thalamic, thalamocortical, pontine, reticular, rubral. Collicular is missing. Collicular or tectal. That means peduncle to the tectal area, because that is one thing which is connected with the eyeball movement. Then we have the inferior peduncle that talks to the reticular system, the pontine and medullary reticular system, and the vestibular system. Look here, there are no efferents going to the spinal cord, because the spinal cord is connected with these reticular components. Reticulospinal or the reticulospinal, either from the medullary or a pontine area, which focus on the gamma motor neurons. The vestibulospinal tract, which focus on the alpha motor neurons. And similarly, rubrospinal tract, which is coming from the red nucleus, that also governs the group of muscle activity, the voluntary muscle activity. And we have the colliculospinal or a tectospinal tract, that would be this thing. So hence, I would like to mention here that there is no direct link to the spinal cord, but there is a link through the brainstem reticular system or a brainstem midbrain structures. The cerebellar cortex consists of three layers. In the outside, it's a cortex and the medulla or inside. Inside is the deep cerebellar nucleus, and in between white fibers. So these three layers: outer molecular layer, Then the Purkinje cell layer. This is a Purkinje cell layer. And then inner granular layer. If you are looking at the cerebral cortex, the isocortex has a 6 layers. So now these 3 layers, if you are looking at the outer molecular layer is a dendritic connections, and the horizontal is parallel fibers are coming from these granular cells. This is a granular cell. They project up, they make the parallel fibers here. This is a parallel fiber. Now, this is a granular cell. Granular cell receives inputs from all afferents. These are called mossy afferents. After this molecular layer, the Purkinje cell layer is a single cell layer. These are very large cells, and these large cells here, if you can just see, the very large dendritic arborization, tree-like arborizations. Very the primary, secondary, tertiary dendrites, and even quaternary or pentennary dendrites. They are projected, and it is all dendritic trees. That is a Purkinje cell layer. Axon of the Purkinje cell will have a synaptic contact with the deep cerebellar nucleus. This is a deep cerebellar nucleus. This deep cerebellar nucleus gives output to the various parts towards the brain, midbrain, the red nucleus, the colliculus, thalamus, or cerebrum, or the other parts in the reticular system and the vestibular system and various component vestibular system. Now come back here. These outputs, they are reaching here. Now we have, this is about the Purkinje cell layer. The granule cell layer, they are consists of the granular cells. They are deeper, and these granular cells have a characteristic T-like projections. These are T-like. They will make a parallel axonal projections. They have there are no dendrites. Are practically not much dendrites there. This is the granular. That is a T. That's making exactly T. Okay, that's a granule cell. Now, these are some of the cell layers of this thing. Now, if you are looking at these cell layers, I have made 3 layers, outer 3 layers and inner deep cerebellar nucleus, and we have the white fibers here. The deeper in between the deep nuclei and these things, there are fibers. The red one here, inputs which are coming to the cerebellum are excitatory. There are 2 inputs. One input from all parts of the body, from the cerebrum, from the colliculus, from the reticular system, from the spinocerebellar tract, so various spinocerebellar tract, vestibulocerebellar tract. All of them come here. This is one input. These inputs are known as mossy fibers. These are all generalized. They are excitatory, and these mossy fiber inputs, they will make a synaptic contact with the granular cells. At the same time, it would give collateral to the deep cerebellar nucleus. That's excitatory input is coming here. Similarly, there is another input. This is coming from the inferior, exclusively from inferior olivary nucleus, and these are known as climbing fibers. So what do? They climb these Purkinje cells, and these climbing fibers are entire the Purkinje cell is activated, and at the same time they will also give the connection. So these are excitatory fibers. So then we have other group of cells here in this area, basket cells and stellate cells, and we have another group of cells here, a Golgi cell. Maybe let us consider these things. Now, what I have made, red is excitatory, black is inhibitory. So the output of the Purkinje cell is inhibitory. So this blue is the DCN output. DCN output is excitatory all the time. Is it more excitation or less excitation? Whatever the output goes from the deep cerebellar nucleus to the various other parts is excitatory. Now, you just look at the structure. This is a wonderful structure. This is a bisected folium. This is one plane. This is one plane here, and this is another plane. And you can just see the various aspects of the cellular organization. These are Purkinje cells. As I was trying to impress upon you, this is the Purkinje cell. You have a beautiful tree-like arborizations. You just see that. Wonderful. You just, if you see this, it's a beautiful tree-like arborizations. And this tree-like arborization have a central axon and many dendrites. And this central axon will connect to the deep cerebellar nucleus. This is the Purkinje cell layer. This is Purkinje cell layer. So because of the Purkinje cell, as it is in this part, this is the outer molecular layer. This is the outer molecular layer where you have the dendritic arborizations or these parallel fibers. These are parallel fibers there. These are parallel fibers of the granular cells. This is the outer molecular layer. This is the Purkinje cell layer. You have the nucleus of the Purkinje cells located. So then here inside is the granular cell layer. This is the granular cell layer. You have the granular cells, and this granular cell layer is giving a T-like. So you can just see that typical T-like axonal projections. In addition, this outer molecular layer has some cells. This is one cell here. And this is also another cell here. This is a basket cell. This is a stellate cell. So basket cell and the stellate cells are there. In the stellate cells are more external. Basket cell are little interior in the sense within the molecular layer. These stellate cells are just superior, and the basket cells are little deeper. Now, another thing, the granule cells I have mentioned. So now these climbing fibers are coming here. This is like a creeper turning around the trees. They are going up to this the Purkinje cell tree. That is the climbing fiber. So the inputs from the other things, that is a mossy inputs, they will come here. They will make a projection to the granular cells. Okay, so that is the cerebellar cortex organization. I have made this blue line separated these three layers. This is a molecular layer. This is a Purkinje cell layer. This is a granular cell layer. Then move on. Just to give you an idea, this is a histological. These things, these are outer molecular layer there. So this is a Purkinje cell layer. You can just see these Purkinje cells, and the arborizations are coming. Suppose if they are stained with a silver staining, you get a beautiful tree-like projections. And these are granular cell layer, and these are white fibers, white matter. So same thing here. You can just see this tree-like arborization, the outer molecular layer, the Purkinje cell layer there, and the granular cell layer. Why I am trying to show you, because there are only three layers, and they will have connections, the number of connections, and because of this dendritic tree that would be governing this is the deep cerebellar nucleus. Okay, so now one more aspect here, the connections. You just see that what is this connection? This is the granular cell. The granular cell. This is a granular cell, and we have one more cell, what is called a Golgi cell. I just missed the Golgi cell in the previous slide. This Golgi cell have a connectivity with the granular. It actually checks the activity of the granular cell. It has connections with the granular cell layer, and also the other cell layers. And here, when with a granular cell layer, it makes a contact, what is known as a glomerulus. glomerulus means it is the cluster of synaptic contacts between the Golgi cell and the granular cell. That I just try to highlight you the neurons present in the cerebellum. So we have three layers: molecular layer, Purkinje cell layer, and the granular layer. Molecular layer has the projections or dendrites of the Purkinje cells and axons of the granule cells. And in addition, they have the basket and the stellate cells. So then we have the Purkinje cell here in the middle, the Purkinje cell, and we have the granular cells. So now we have 5 types of neurons in the cerebellar cortex. These 5 types of neurons are Purkinje cell, this is Purkinje cell, the granular cell, this is a granular cell, typical T. So then basket cells and stellate cells are in the outer molecular layer. The stellate cells are more external, and the basket cells are interior. And Golgi cells, these Golgi cells, this is a Golgi cell. This is a Golgi cell. This Golgi cell have a contact with the granular cell, and these are intersected by the parallel fibers of the granular cells, granular axons. Now you have a deep cerebellar nuclei. This is a deep cerebellar nuclei, and this between the deep cerebellar nuclei and this thing, this is the white matter. Now these are the mossy inputs from the rest of the areas, and these are climbing inputs. These are climbing fibers. They are only like a creeper. It's going up. They are only for the Purkinje cell. These are the neurons. So I have made 6 neurons in the cerebellum. In the cerebellar cortex, there are 5 neurons: Purkinje, granular, basket cells, stellate cells, and Golgi cells. Let us consider this part. The Purkinje cells are a large cells. They receive input from granule cells. You look here. This is the granule cell axon, a T or a parallel fiber, and at each intersection with the dendritic tree here, it gives the excitatory input to the Purkinje cell. So now, and it also gives input. The Purkinje cell also receives input from the look here, baskets. This is a stellate cell, and basket. This is a basket cell. Basket cells project to the soma of the Purkinje cell, and the stellate cell to the dendrites of the Purkinje cells. So that means the basket cells and the stellate cells, and it receives input from the climbing fibers. This output goes to the deep cerebellar nuclei. This is the deep cerebellar nuclei, and this output is inhibitory. The Purkinje cell output is inhibitory, and the deep cerebellar output is always excitatory, whether it is more excitation or less excitation. So that means there is a continuous excitatory output going from here. That excitatory output is modulated by the Purkinje cell, and the transmitter of the Purkinje cell is a GABA. That is about Purkinje cell. Now about a granular cell. Granular cell, these are granular cells, the blue one, and having a T axons as parallel fibers. You just see that these T axons as a parallel fiber in the molecular layer. These receive input from the mossy fibers. These mossy fibers come from the cerebral and the pontine and reticular, the vestibular, spinocerebellar tract. All these things are mossy fibers. Also, this receives input from the what is this? This is the Golgi cell. It also gives a projection to the granular cell. So thus, there is this will be trying to check the output of this granular cell. Output of the granular cell is going to the dendrites of the Purkinje cell, and then you get these basket cells, and stellate cells are also excited, and they in turn, these basket cells and stellate cells, when they are stimulated, they inhibit this thing. So look here, this is coming here, granular cell, and when it is activated, these are activated. And when these are activated, they inhibit the Purkinje cell. Now, this is also exciting the dendrites of the Purkinje cell. So this is excitation here, and this is also excitation. So even before because these excitations, when they are reaching, even before they are reaching, this inhibitory effect is reaching here. This is what is called a feed forward inhibition. So that means this excitation, it is trying to come back, and whatever the submitted information or submitted the electrical signal is being inhibited because it has been excited by the granular cell itself, and this is known as a feed forward inhibition. Now, I have mentioned about the basket cells and stellate cells here. These are basket cells and stellate cells. They are there in the outer molecular layer. They receive inputs from the parallel fibers of the granule cells. These are the parallel fibers. And the output of the basket cell goes to the stroma. Here, you can just see that. And output of the stellate cell goes to the X or this dendrite. Then they are the basis for they provide a feed forward inhibition. That means inhibition arrives even before this Purkinje cell is being inhibited. That is the meaning. The inhibition comes even before the inhibition of the Purkinje cell, because this whatever the excitation, when it is excited, and even before the excitation of the Purkinje cell, because it will excite the Purkinje cell, but these excitation is at the dendritic point. The dendritic excitations are small, and all those excitations are summed up here in the axon hillock. Axon hillock is here. So now when it is being summated and trying to activate the entire Purkinje cell, and these things will have an inhibitory effect, and this is known as a feed forward inhibition. Golgi cells in turn are connected with the parallel fibers. You can just see that they have the parallel fibers, and they will give a feedback inhibition to the granular cells. And also they receive MOSI inputs. The MOSI inputs here, they are excited when they are excited granular cells. They are exciting here. That is to check the granular cell activity or output. Now, deep cerebellar nucleus, the inputs are three inputs. One, the deep cerebellar nucleus receives primarily from the Purkinje cell. Then it receives input from the MOSI fibers. The MOSI fibers gives the input to the deep cerebellar nucleus. Then the climbing fibers also gives input to the deep cerebellar nucleus. These are the inputs. The output goes to various areas: pons, medulla, reticular system, colliculus, the vestibular system, vestibular nucleus, red nucleus, the tectal nucleus, thalamus, and all other areas. So that is the output of the deep cerebellar nucleus. Now come, I'm just trying to give the afferent connections of the cerebellum. These are MOSI fibers, because I was trying to tell you or impress you upon the MOSI fibers. The MOSI fibers their composition is from the vestibular system, vestibulocerebellar tract, dorsal spinocerebellar tract, ventral spinocerebellar tract, cuneo-cerebellar tract, that is from the head and neck region, tectocerebellar tract from the colliculus or tectum, then pontocerebellar tract, that is from the corticopontine fibers, reticulocerebellar tract. So these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, more than 7 signals are going through the MOSI fibers. Whereas a climbing fiber receives exclusively from the olivary nucleus, that is inferior olivary nucleus, and olivocerebellar tract. These are climbing fibers. These are corrective one. These are informative. Now, the efferents from cerebellum goes by three nucleus, one dentate nucleus, interpositus and vestigial nucleus, and vestibular nucleus. The vestibular nucleus, flocculonodular lobe through the vestibular nucleus. Now, the dentate nucleus provides information to the thalamus as the dentatothalamic tract. They provides information to the some of them are through the pons, dentato, pons, pontothalamic. That is here the reticular system comes into play. Dentato-rubral, that means red nucleus. Dentato-tectal or dentato-collicular, that is for the eyeball movement. Dentato-reticular, that is for the posture regulating mechanism. Then this is going upwards to the brain, the midbrain and the collicular level. Then interpositus, that is talking to the spinal cord. The cerebello-reticular, that is a reticulospinal tract comes, cerebello-tectal and cerebello-collicular, that is the colliculospinal or tectospinal, cerebello-olivary, olivospinal, cerebello-pontine, pontospinal, that is a reticulospinal, cerebello-vestibular, that is vestibulospinal. So that means the output from the cerebellum is not directly connecting the spinal cord. However, through these things, it is connected to the cerebellum. Now, the vestibular system connected with the cerebello-vestibular system. These are the efferent connections of the cerebellum. Now, the functions of the cerebellum. I am here only listing the functions of the cerebellum. It is the coordination of the movements. So that means all our movements are coordinated in such a way that they become smooth and well organized, and you don't have any interruptions. If you are seeing extent of my elbow, and I have to, it will come in stepwise manner. And but when we perform, it is a smooth movement. But in the absence of the cerebellar activity, this is broken. That is a coordination of all various the modes of action. So the entire group of muscle activity are coordinated. That is a coordination of movements. Then sequencing and scheduling of the movements. So that means the which muscle to come, when to come, and how to coordinate, and that is also performed by the cerebellum, the sequencing and scheduling of the movements. Then the movement, when you are trying to perform a work, suddenly you discover that it is not up to the mark, there will be a correction applied. For example, if you are trying to lift an empty box, and when you are trying to lift an empty box, and you go with the whatever the box size and the whatever the configuration, and you go with a particular already pre-existing knowledge or the cognitive component, and you go with that force, suddenly you discover that it's empty. So in that case, immediate correction is not made. You may be either overlift it or underlift it. So these feedback corrections are servo control corrections or servo control movements. So that depending upon the less or more that has to be corrected, and that is a feedback correction is performed by the cerebellum. Then it would smoothen the alternating actions, turning off and on. Say, for example, I am doing a pronation supination. I am doing it perfectly, one after another, without any. That means turning off and on, like that, the pronation supination. This type of alternating contractions, they are all smoothened, very nice. And we do it so nicely. So this particular smoothing of the actions, that is performed by the cerebellum. That is a turning off and on the actions on repetitive times. Then it links the muscle tone. It maintains the muscle tone by the alpha gamma linkage. So the cerebellum regulates the muscle tone. So in case of the loss of cerebellum, the tone is diminished. So that means maintenance of the tone through the alpha and the gamma, which are linked together. Then we have the posture and equilibrium. Posture is coming from the vestigial nucleus, equilibrium is coming from the vestibular nucleus. So these two things together, they will try to coordinate the actions of the axial muscles, which maintain the posture and gravity and equilibrium. And this is assisted by the vestibular system, otolith organs, and the semicircular canals. The eyeball movement. So the eyeball movement, whenever we are trying to perform an action, the eyeball movements are there. This eyeball movement is to the vestibulo-ocular reflex. So that means from the vestibular system, suppose if there is something wrong with the vestibular system, the eyeballs start moving. This is a vestibulo-ocular reflex because if the turning of the head should also turn the eyeballs. So that is the meaning, the vestibulo-ocular reflex. So that means when we are moving, the eyes do not remain in the same axis. They come along with the axis of the motion. Then it has the cerebellum has the motor learning and cognitive functions. That means there is what is called a synaptic plasticity, in the sense they try to smoothen your actions. They become perfect. They become perfect, and they will try to monitor all that. So by doing the repetitive actions, these cerebellar things, they become perfect, and that is a part of the learning and the cognitive actions. That means you do the actions very precisely, very accurately. So that is these are all the functions of the cerebellum. So to summarize the cellular organization of the cerebellum, I try to remember this diagram because I may be using this diagram in my next discussion. We have this Purkinje cell. This is the main Purkinje cell that is with a deep cerebellar nucleus. This is PC is a Purkinje cell. This is a primary cell. And this Purkinje cell, this is a granule cell. Granule cell, you have the T-like connections. Now, this T-like connections, it will activate the dendrites of the Purkinje cell, and the output of the Purkinje cell is inhibitory. The output of the granule cell is excitatory. Now, this would excite the basket cells in the outer molecular layer. So this is what it makes contact with the soma of the Purkinje cells. Similarly, stellate cells here, somewhere here, and they are also activated. That would be with the dendrites. Then we have the Golgi cell here. This GC is a Golgi cell. The Golgi cell is inhibitory to the granular cells. Now, the inputs are coming from the mossy fiber. The mossy fiber I mentioned coming from the various areas. Unlike the climbing fibers coming from only inferior olivary nucleus or olivo-cerebellar tract. These mossy inputs either from cerebrum, vestibular system, spinal cord, the reticular system, or all these things, they would come and activate the deep cerebellar nucleus, and they will increase the impulse rate. Then at the same time, it would activate the granular cell, and the granular cell in turn activate the BC cell, that is the basket cell, and it inhibits even before the excitation arrives. This is the feed-forward inhibition. That means the activation of the basket cell or the stellate cell inhibits the Purkinje cell even before the Purkinje cell action is beginning. That is the feed-forward inhibition. That means this is what these two cells do. Now, this Purkinje cell activation, it produces inhibition, and the activation by Purkinje, this granular cell, is not great. It is a smooth, and it has to activate many dendrites to produce action potential. Whereas the climbing fiber, because it is the fiber coming from the olivary nucleus, it activates the Purkinje cell, and once it activates the Purkinje cell, that is a powerful stroke, and that would immediately inhibit these things. These are mossy inputs, and Golgi cell try to check the actions of the granule cells, and whatever the outputs, it receives inputs from number of other areas. These are the cellular organization of the cerebellum. Now, the structural organization I have made the spinocerebellum. This is the vermis, that is, and this is a lateral cerebellum, and this is a vestibulocerebellum. Vestibulocerebellum, the spinocerebellum, and cerebrocerebellum. The spinocerebellum is a central area that is for the axial muscles, and the intermediate area is for the distal muscles. This flocculonodular lobe, it is a vestibular part of the cerebellum. And these things, this has a dentate nucleus here, and this has the nucleus interpositus, and it has a vestigial nucleus. This has a vestigial nucleus. And the flocculonodular lobe shades the vestibular nucleus. So now, so this spinocerebellum, the spinocerebellum performs a motor execution. This, in the motor execution, there is a servo control mechanism, the coordination, switch and alternating actions, and alpha gamma linkage. These are the actions of the spinocerebellum. Then we have the lateral cerebellum. Lateral cerebellum is connected with the dentate nucleus here, and this is for the motor planning. They receive input from the premotor area, and this is for a planning of the action, and sequencing and scheduling of the action, and a cognitive detailing of the actions, and monitoring the actions as they are going on. So that is about the cerebrocerebellum or lateral cerebellum. Then we come back here, the vestibular cerebellum, vestibular part of the cerebellum. This vestibular part of the cerebellum is associated with vestibular system, that is for posture and equilibrium, gait, and eyeball coordination. The central part of the cerebellum, is connected with the vestigial nucleus. Vestigial nucleus connects to the, again, to the vestibular system, and to the posture and the gait, and even eyeball coordination. This is in summary about the overall connections of the cerebellum, and the link to the functions. Okay, I have referred these books, the Guyton, Genong, and Kendall's Neuroscience, and the Samson Wright's Physiology. What I have here for you, describe the parts, connections, and functions of cerebellum. Then write short notes on Purkinje cells, the mossy fibers, the climbing fibers, servo control mechanism, feed forward inhibition, functions of the cerebellum, the granular cell, deep cerebellar nuclei. Try to work on these things. Okay, the next class I will take up with the circuits, signs, and symptoms of cerebellar disorders. Thank you.